Jocelyn, tell us a bit about yourself. Who are you?
Who am I? That's such a big question. So I am first and foremost a mother of three incredible human beings. I am a founder of an organization called True, who works in executive and team well-being, helping with organizational cultures and well-being and communication. I am practicing vulnerability. I am practicing, going through healing journeys to support mental health. And I have come to Unsinkable today because I really feel I'm in a place now where I'm ready to use my voice to support others who are navigating their mental health journey. And so I want to share a bit of an analogy as to
Okay.
who I am. And
Okay.
so I am a surfer. I am a
Okay.
surfer of life, and mental health are is the waves to me, and the ocean is our life, and the ocean doesn't rest. And so I feel like even the very best surfers crash, fall off their board, get swept up under the water. For
Mhm.
me personally, I've tried surfing, like the board has hit my head. It's been a whole kerfuffle. I've gotten swept up with sand in my bathing suit. Like I've been a whole mess getting out of the ocean.
Yeah.
And I kind of liken my journey with mental health to being a surfer. And for me, I was on a surfboard.
Okay.
And for others, I think some people have yachts, some people have canoes, some people have kayaks to navigate the journey of mental health and well
Mhm.
being. But I am resilient because I've gotten back up on that board every time, and rode the next wave. So I wanted to kind of frame my story in that context that I have learned to surf through my life.
Amazing. That really fits in with the whole Unsinkable brand. That was not planned.
I
Um,
know, it just came to me.
right. I love it. I love it. Cool. So, it's a journey, life as you described. And as we're talking about it, I think the first thing that we like to get into is sort of where it all started. So, can you bring me back to the beginning of your journey?
For sure. So, when I was thinking through this, the beginning of my journey begins with who I was born as. And so, over my journey, and I've just realized this in the past decade, I was born an empath, and
Okay.
it's also referred to as a highly sensitive person. And so, this means I feel very deeply. I
Mm.
have a superpower that I needed to learn how to harness over my lifetime in order to protect my own energy from opinions, thoughts, words, emotions of other people who were coming at me. And so over my journey, I really took on everybody else's suffering. And so it just came to a time where I knew that that was unsustainable and I didn't have the tools or anything how to handle it. So
Mm.
that's how I was born. And I didn't
Yeah.
realize it until in my 30s.
So you've always been like that from the very beginning.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, I feel like it must be so.
Mm.
But then I go back, and if I just go a little bit further into my journey to like my childhood, kindergarten era, when I was in like those primary grades, my nickname was Jossie Bossy.
Okay.
And so, as you and I know, because we've chatted already,
Uh-huh.
um, that was funny. I mean, people say bossy kids are good leaders. So I
Mm.
really believe that to be true about myself now, as an adult. But that should tell a little part of my story because at that time, before I hit adolescence, I had a voice and it was really strong.
Okay.
Um, I was the firstborn. So I was the firstborn in my family of three kids. My dad would dress me in denim overalls so we could go outside in the garden and play, and I'd dig up rocks and salamanders. Um, and I have a lot of very fond memories of my childhood traveling and adventuring because my parents really enjoyed being outdoors, being in nature, and being very active.
Mhm.
So I think that sets a little bit of the stage. And then as I approached adolescence, there was definitely some mean girls, some childhood bullies
Okay.
who contributed to where I'm going to get to later in my story around us silencing that stronger voice that I had and my
Mhm.
own self perception.
Sounds like you're foreshadowing a bit. Um, so I guess, yeah, let us in. when did things start to get challenging? You talk about the mean girl stuff and around that adolescent stage. That's me guessing. So, but yeah, for you, when did things start to get challenging? Like, what was going on?
My very first memory, and this came out through therapy, my very first memory is a traumatizing one of me
Okay.
hiding. So I think things unconsciously were difficult for me at that young age, and my parents separated when I was young for a short period of time. So those all contribute to the childhood experiences. But I think things got really difficult when I hit adolescence and puberty and hormones started. And that's when I became a lot more conscious and aware of my surroundings. It's also when I started really battling with mood. And at the time, I only had the language of PMS.
Hmm.
And now I'm so much more aware that there are so many more, there is such a greater spectrum for women who are navigating hormones and their mental health. And I haven't been diagnosed, but PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder, is a more severe form of PMS. And those hormones and emotions are really, really strong.
Okay.
So it makes sense to me that I started to really struggle at this time when the hormones started going.
Hmm.
And also it was a time, where uh, I had mentioned some of the mean girl bullying things. It was also then a time where I started to have body image issues and food intake control because I felt out of control. And I know that disordered eating, they talk a lot about an inability to control
Yeah.
things. So I hit that track in like grade 8, grade 9, and that's when it was really most severe for me.
Hmm.
Um, and then through the rest of high school I was an overachiever. I was
Uh,
incredibly independent. I did really well in school. I actually fast tracked through high school at that
okay.
time to graduate early, because I was ready to be out in the world.
How old were you when you graduated?
Well, we had OACs then.
Okay.
So I graduated when I was 18, I think, and then like typical age was to go to university at 19. So I was a whole semester early, and I moved to Banff and I lived there between high school and university, and I worked.
Could you say a little bit more about the PMDD piece? I don't really know that much about it myself, and maybe I'm assuming maybe a lot of other folks don't. Could you like maybe just talk a little bit more about that and sort of how that might have played a part in those challenges at the time?
So from my own just awareness of it, it's feeling really high highs and really low lows related to
Okay.
hormones, and it's actually uh, in the brain, and so it's has to do with mood. And for me, through the cycle, there was specific times where I'd be really, really high and happy and joyful. But then there was also the times where I was incredibly low. And I think that's really where it goes almost into depression. And the feelings are uncontrollable. For me, the feelings were uncontrollable. And it's
Yeah.
like I didn't know what to do with them or how to foster them. And this also just came to me in the past decade, is like how to manage these types of emotions, because at that time it was uh take a contraceptive or take something
Mhm.
to take the edge off of the hormones. And I was just at a conference with Women Mind and CAMH where they were talking a lot about different types of modalities of support and what might be more helpful and what might hinder, and how contraceptives actually can impact a female brain. And so, what else can we do to really
Mhm.
support women's mental health? So that's really what it is, and heavy, like just wipes out the energy entirely, wipes you out as a person.
Is that sort of like around the time, maybe you alluded to it a little bit? Is that sort of around the time where you start to like really feel the depression feelings, or was that like a thing that started when you were younger or became exacerbated when you were, I guess, in your adolescent phase?
I definitely think it was the hormones with the depression. It
Okay.
was definitely, for me, reflecting back, it was related. The hormones and the depression were really inextricably linked,
Okay.
and it was the feelings of just like not knowing what to do with such big feelings,
Mhm.
and how to surf surf those waves that were really like, certain times of the month were really, really like great. And I was riding
Mhm.
the wave and surfing and doing all the tricks. And then, other times it's like I'm being pulled out in the riptide and totally taken out. And so I wasn't consciously aware of it at the time, although I
Mhm.
knew something was happening for me. And now I have a much greater, like, I can support my own girls if they're navigating tough times throughout their cycle, or other women, to really pay attention to what impacts that biological female cycle has on mental health.
You talk about having the big feelings.
Mhm.
My experience of depression as a teenager brought a lot of big feelings, but
Mhm.
I found a way to hide them. What was it like for you? Were you expressing things outward, inward? What kinds of things were you feeling?
I was suppressing. Yeah, I was suppressing. I mean, I was teenager partying. um, but I was definitely suppressing. And I think, if you envision a beach ball trying to push it down underwater,
Mhm.
eventually it erupts. Yeah, I was suppressing a lot because I didn't know what to do with it. And I didn't have anybody to talk to in my growing up. There was no therapy. Like, it wasn't like there was no coach. I didn't have anyone to talk to other than my friends, and they were just busy being teenagers. And
Yeah.
so I felt really isolated. I actually would isolate. I'd isolate in my bedroom. I would spend a lot of
Yeah.
time in my room.
What were you doing in your room, I guess, is the question.
I
Mhm.
think I'd listen to like sad music. I would look through magazines. There was no computer really at the time. It was just like, I think those were the two things that I did. Computer, like music and magazines, and chilling maybe. And I wasn't a big talker on the phone, like in
Yeah.
teenagehood. Some kids are were real talkers with like the phone with the cord. I
Yeah.
didn't do that. I was
Yeah.
really much more, and I am introverted. And so
Okay.
as a person, I'm introverted. But I think that was a coping mechanism for me to protect my energy, and just I totally went within.
You also talk about being a high achiever,
Mm,
straight A's and all of that stuff, being a leader.
mhm.
I think, sometimes when you are achieving, it's hard for others around you to see what's going on. Was that true for you? Did people see what you were experiencing? Was it like you were probably giving indicators, but did people pick up on those things, or did it more so feel like you were just traveling this journey without anybody noticing?
I think the latter. I definitely think I was traveling the journey without anybody noticing, because I did. There's a quote or a meme or something that goes around the internet that talks about like the people who are the kindest, or like the most caring, or the most giving, or the brightest lights. Make sure you're checking in on those people,
Mm,
because you don't know what they're going through on the insides. I definitely think I was, um I was independent. I was doing well.
mm,
I was working a ton, a couple different jobs. Like, I was doing my own thing. And I definitely think there was sadness and sorrow, but also I had freedom and independence. And so
mm,
I had other outlets, I think, to channel my energy. So school, achieving, I had a good social network with friends, so I wasn't lonely. But I
mhm,
kept my circle tight. I think people probably had a perception of me of being a bit aloof, but I also
okay,
think that that was more of a self-protection measure. And I've always been very able to articulate and have a conversation. I worked in the service industry
mhm.
where I grew up, and so I was a waitress and a bus girl, and very social and outgoing.
So you presented really.
Hmm.
If there were any indicators that others could see, what do you think they would be?
I definitely articulated myself through notes.
Okay.
When I was suffering, I would give my mom and dad letters, and they were pages and pages. My mom actually saved one and gave it to me recently. But that's how I would articulate myself. And interestingly enough, I was journaling, which is now a big thing that people talk about, journaling your emotions and feelings. And sometimes I would give it to them, and sometimes I wouldn't. But I had a lot to say, but because I was so emotional and sensitive, I would always end up like kerfuffled and in tears. So to
Mhm.
articulate myself was tricky. So I was a writer. I would write
Okay.
and I would give people notes and letters.
So you were, in a way, expressing to people how you were feeling.
Yes, and I think the maladaptive behavior started when I'm like, nobody's listening to me. Here I am
Mm,
speaking and speaking and speaking. Who's hearing me out there? And this is for my life. This is not just for my childhood. This
mm,
goes up to like recent day. And like,
okay.
and that's why I feel so passionate about people being witnessed and seen and acknowledged in their humanity.
I'm on the same boat, to continue the analogy, same surfboard. I don't know. um, uh, that being said, why do you think people weren't noticing?
My perception is that people are in their own space and they're operating at their best level and the consciousness that they have at that time. And so when I think it's a natural human tendency to want to fix somebody when they're upset.
Mhm,
And this is something that came up for me later as I started to train in coaching. We don't need to fix or move or shush or hush or tell people not to cry. We allow it
mm,
and let them process, because if we don't, that's the beach ball that explodes and it has an impact, or it's the depression that manifests because
mhm,
emotions haven't been processed well. So I really feel like because other people didn't have the tools and the resources to be with me in the way I needed them to be,
mhm,
they helped to the best to their ability. And that's now why I go into organizations and I help people with the
mhm.
skills to just be with people, because that's all people need. It's not this big wild crazy puzzle that we're trying to solve. It's really simple human behaviors that we all have inside that need to be cultivated a bit more.
With that being said, what
Mm.
would being there with you have looked like, and what impact do you think that would have had for you at that time?
Yeah, this is interesting because maybe just sitting with me and letting me cry, or being with me while I cried without trying to change the emotions I was feeling. It would have meant other people changing their behavior that was impacting me, because I think that goes into one of my challenging parts of my life is other people's behaviors. And from a professional standpoint, there's a model: top down, outside in, inside, bottom up, where the outside in forces really impact mental health. And so I already was navigating my own top down, my own mind, my own thoughts, my own feelings, but the outside in then piled it on, and the bottom up what I was already doing. And so with that framework, I would have wanted people just to hear me, sit with me, change their behavior, which you can't get someone to change their behavior. And this is something I teach my kids: you can only work on yourself, on how
Mhm.
to navigate other people's behavior and your perception, or how much you take on from them. So that's an interesting one. It's an interesting question. Yeah, I'm not
Absolutely.
broken. I didn't need anybody to fix me or try and solve my problem. I needed someone just to listen to me and let me cry.
Mhm.
And my girlfriends were really good at that, I think. But at whatever age throughout life, they and over time, I have an incredible network of support, and so that's something unique, I think, for not everybody has that.
How did that help you at the time? The girlfriends.
Oh, I had a tight circle of girls. I was very, I had a small circle. I've always kind of kept a small circle, but my girlfriends had their own navigations of mental health, and so we were
Mhm.
all like always all in it together.
Okay,
Yeah,
awesome. So they made space.
for sure.
They were with you. I love that. I
Mhm.
always love hearing those stories. And I think friendship is really important.
Yeah.
Um, you know, isolation can be really deleterious, I think, for mental health. And, so for me, when I think about like how do we approach recovery, I think a big part does have to be community and finding ways to cultivate your people. Did you always have those girlfriends, or was that you kind of, did you like grow up together kind of thing?
Yeah, so I have my best girls are from childhood, like kindergarten, all through till present day, and we're very connected and very close. So I feel blessed that I
Amazing.
had this support network. And like you said, isolation and loneliness and lack of connection fuel poor mental health. And so in all of what you and I are looking to accomplish in Unsinkable is creating connection and sharing stories and being more together as humans through difficult times.
Absolutely. One of the things that we're really trying to build with these conversations is you know provide uh, some sort of touch point or connection for folks to realize that they're really not alone, even if it feels like they are, right? Um, you know, I know that for me, I really didn't have anybody in my world as a support network, and it was strangers, who their stories that I was able to connect with that allowed me to feel like, okay, I'm not irredeemable, or these kinds of things. So thank you for you know offering to give some of that today. So challenging stuff's happening in your adolescence and transitioning into your young adulthood. Um, w- take us a little bit further into like what was happening as you transitioned into adulthood, university, I'm assuming, and beyond, and like what was your life like then, and were there more challenges, less?
Mm.
How were things progressing?
Oh goodness. I was uber. I think my coping mechanism was to be super independent. Um, a really important part of my story that adds to everything that I was experiencing from a female hormone perspective is for my life, I have lived with addiction in people very close to me. And this has a lot to do with my story. And what I obviously know now as I've gone through this is people who are turning to alcohol is a self-soothing mechanism for their own pain and suffering that they don't necessarily want to feel. And it's so normalized in society that it's actually contributing to the mental health crisis that we're having because it's a crutch. And alcohol changes people's behavior to be unconscious. There is no forethought because literally the prefrontal cortex of the brain is not in use. There is no care for the impact that people's behavior has on another human being. And it exacerbates impulsivity and unconscious behavior. And so when people don't address their own pain and they find coping mechanisms, that pain gets projected onto the people in their lives.
Mhm,
And so that reckless unconscious behavior is a theme through my story and how I began to have kind of maladaptive behaviors in order to protect myself and not take other people's emotional outbursts on.
mhm,
And so something that really started to manifest for me as I continued to go through, as you were asking, like take me through the rest of it,
mhm,
is I adapted a mindset that's, I mean, really lovely, be kind,
mhm,
but it was a bit pathological because it went to be kind at all costs. And what it
mhm,
landed in was put everybody before you, put everybody's comfort before you, because who knows if you don't, what might happen or how you'll be treated.
mhm.
So there was a fear of like the emotional backlash. And so
Okay.
I lost boundaries. I silenced myself verbally.
Mhm,
And I am just unconsciously gave my intuition and my power away
mhm,
um, because of fear.
mhm,
So my nervous system over the years was programmed this way with people I really really cared about in my
mhm,
life, and it was really hard to watch because I just couldn't understand. And now I understand that it's suffering, and it is a mental health challenge, addiction. And so
mhm.
that played out for me um, really strongly throughout my entire life.
How did you arrive at the understanding that this was their suffering externalized?
I don't know where specifically it came from because I've done so much research on it, and um, I did my master's in mental
Okay.
health, in the psychology and neuroscience of mental health, and I just graduated. And the one of the courses that I did the
Mhm,
best in was addiction. And so
Naturally.
yeah, because it's like closest to me. And the other one
Yeah,
was
of
affective disorders, which because of my mood. So those were the most resonant for me and
course.
parenting. But I learned about it like through that, and I was
Mm,
able to start to cultivate a lens of compassion for
yeah.
those people, and really and actually just start to see their suffering
Mm,
and see that they don't have the tools and the resources to be different. And there's a genetic component to all of this. And there's also the addiction component of choice
mhm.
and getting help and stigmatization and normalization of alcohol in social settings, and that just being like a thing that, oh, if you're not having a drink, it's like, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you?
Yeah.
And so that's a real problem in our society. And I reference it. Men are more likely to go to addiction and suicide. Women are more likely to go to depression and anxiety in the mental health spectrum. And so I really think we have an opportunity here as a turning point for humanity to really support people.
You talk a lot about or a bit about the normalization.
Okay.
Can you say a bit more about like what does that look like? Like what are the things we can look out for to, maybe become a little bit more cognizant of what that normalization looks like?
The messaging that a glass of wine a day is good for your health. Um, Advertising of like the social luxury of alcohol. It's served everywhere. So
Mhm,
I've recently done a corporate campaign around alcohol in the workplace. If we think about whatever the types of workplaces are,
mhm,
conferences, work events, birthday parties, social events, even emojis, like the cheers
mm,
emoji is like a celebrate.
yeah,
It's a two
true.
champagne clinks or two beer links. Like
Yeah,
this is how we celebrate in society.
it's true.
And just having awareness to that in itself, I think, is helpful for people before we go into the neurotoxic effects, the cancer, the heart disease, all the things that are related to it. And it's a massive industry. Um, the alcohol industry, kind of like the tobacco industry
Mhm.
was. And so we saw what happened with the tobacco industry, and maybe the future is something like that with with alcohol. But I think people need to be aware of the impacts it has, and people need to be more aware of their behaviors. People say to me all the time,
Yeah.
like, my behavior doesn't change when I drink. And I'm like,
Oh,
yeah, actually it does. But you're drunk, so it doesn't, you don't know. And I'm sober, so I see it. And I'm, highly sensitive, so whatever. But there's just so many, like vino and vinyasa. People are marrying yoga and wine. Like that doesn't make sense to me. So, but to each their own. I'm just here to raise awareness because I have lived my life with alcohol
mhm.
super close to it and addiction. So
What are some of those like behaviors that maybe people aren't seeing when they're ingesting alcohol or when alcohol is maybe starting to become more than a social thing and, a bit of an issue?
it's a cycle. Like it's not just a drink a day or a casual thing. It's like an everyday thing, and it's to feel okay the next day. It's a recovery. But I think the important part is emotional outbursts and emotional reactivity, and um, putting out pain or behaviors onto other people really hurts them. Like it's really hurtful. And so it's how do you mind your impact and be very conscious of the impact you have on another person, because you don't know how that person's going to take in the information. But they talk a lot about, there's a lot of conversation around like if you have a drink then you need another drink to feel better, so it's like the drink, then the next day the drink, and whatever that might look like for someone. So
So it's challenging, um, because I don't know if you felt like this, but balancing the compassion with
mhm,
the I really dislike the way I'm made to feel because of whatever behaviors other people are exhibiting, right? So
mhm.
how do you balance those pieces in a way that doesn't lead to, more maladaptive behavior, or, how to, I guess, keep the compassion in balance with, you know, other people might feel resentful.
Well, that is so tricky. Like up until very recently, it's a conversation I've had with my therapist because I've had to learn to unwind from that behavior. So what she said to me is you can have compassion for someone, but when the behavior becomes like an outward projection or feels like abusive, that's not okay. So we're not condoning the behavior. You can still have compassion, but that highly sensitive person wanted to have compassion and disregard the impact
Mhm.
on me. But that's can't be the case because that's why I was suffering, because I was carrying too much compassion or empathy.
Mhm.
So there's
Mhm.
like a really tricky dance that I've experienced around that. How do you navigate that? Because it's like I'm not condoning your behavior. It's not okay.
Mhm.
I do have compassion for you. So there's a paradox there. I think um and energetically, it's like how do you create boundaries to have those two thoughts paradoxically, but how do you create boundaries to keep yourself safe?
What do boundaries look like? Because we hear the word boundaries all the time, but we're often not sort of told what they look like. So, what do boundaries look like?
Space, like relationship space, different modalities of communicating, I think, if in person gets too much, then it's text, or if text is too accessible, then email or not. It's finding the confidence, and I think this is where I've really struggled to say like I'm not okay with this. This is not okay. Um yeah, space, communication, words. I have not like had to fully cut people out of my life. I know some people may have, but those are the tools that I have used. And also like the inner work, a lot of what I want to bring this all back to is like my mental well health and the journey that I have been on, because I can't control other people. It's just the component of the outer influences on me have contributed to my journey, but I have had to navigate those types of relationships to, create my inner safety mechanisms and recognize certain nuances in behavior that are more subtle. And like, I use the analogy of carbon monoxide. Like some types of behaviors can be very like silent and deadly, and some types of behaviors can be very overt and like so visible, but there's a real dance there, and so that's just something that I've had to really work through is finding my own inner core, my own inner strength to have greater boundaries around how I'm treated in general in life, regardless of who it is.
Was there a moment for you that was like, this is when I know I have to change? And, you know, to keep it focused on you,
Mhm.
what were the changes that were happening?
How I learned to have so this is good. How I learned to have boundaries. I trained as a coach. So
Okay.
that was one of my first. So my first boundary was like really like hard. Like I'm not tolerating this any longer. And then I went and trained as a coach, and that was really incredibly helpful for me because through the process of the skills I learned, it was all about learning and understanding ourselves first, and then other people second. And
Okay.
so it's an experiential learning process to get connected to values, to perceptions, perspectives, to getting connected to boundaries. So if you say yes to being, in this situation, what are you saying no to? So the yes is I'm saying yes to the other person. The no is I'm saying no to myself. So
Mm.
that was so painful over time. And so through coach skills training, with the Coactive Training Institute, I learned a ton of life skills, communication skills, self reflection tools that sent me on my healing journey, on a new career path, and on having like
Mhm.
this impact in the world.
So what were some of those tools that you picked up?
So when we're talking about boundaries, I think so there's values.
Okay.
My values were different than other, like when our values are different than another person's values, that's okay. We can honor and acknowledge another person's values, but if there's places where your values are being trampled as a person, um, then that's where a lot of suffering can happen. So really understanding and recognizing my own personal values was huge in that, because I could then start to have the awareness, oh, this is my value of respect. It's being trampled right now.
Mm,
There's values, and being that the through the skills, through the training, through the coaching, I gained so much more self-awareness, and this is where
mm,
all of the healing began, was
mm,
values work. um the one huge thing for me was perspective. So the way I'm seeing situations, there's like 8 million ways to see one situation. We all
mm,
have unique ways. And that's one of my go-to tools, because our minds can be really tricky with us. So even our own minds can make up things. So it's like,
mhm,
here's how I'm looking at a situation, but you could be looking at it differently. Another person could be looking at it differently. There's 8 million other ways to look at it differently. And so just really going through different ones and the perspectives that serve and feel good for me, because when you take the time to pay attention to those perspectives, we can feel, like I felt the difference in my energy. If I
mhm,
was looking at something in a certain way that was not supportive of me, I could feel the difference when I got taken into another perspective that I helped cultivate that was much more self-supporting.
mhm.
So that was another tool. Um,
That
going,
sounds hard though. Like it almost sounds like a bit of like there's obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but for me, it seems like maybe self-awareness, and you mentioned that is a big part of that. But
yeah.
then maybe also like imagination in terms of like projecting your selfhood into these different perspectives. And I think that's a really challenging thing to do. So what might support people in being able to kind of build these mental projections into how different ways of being might potentially feel.
So the whole experience of working with a coach is that helps you experience a new perspective and really somatically feel into it. And so even people who don't have a coach or don't have those types of resources, it's a friend or a mentor or a colleague, or a peer group could ask these same types of questions, like, how are you looking at the situation? How does that feel for you? What thoughts go through your mind with that, and really get more into like, how does it feel, and then trying on another perspective and actually physically shifting your energy into those different types of being is really powerful. And just that question and those two questions, like how are you seeing this now? What's another way we could look at it? How might your child see it? How might your friends see it? How might your dog see it? How might your like boss see it? How, like those types of things. And then like really going through the exercise of how do you feel when you look at it in a new way? And so
Mhm,
just some simple questions can be tools that anybody can ask. So that's what's important to me about the work that we do, is getting the simplicity of questions out there for people to ask, people who might be suffering or struggling, because they just need a little help with a shift in their perspective or their mind.
mhm, mhm,
It's not easy. It's very difficult to do on your own. And I think that's why I'm here today, is to like help share some tools and resources, because the only thing that is different for me from my beginning of my journey till the present day, my anxiety and depressions, and highs and lows in the mood are still there, but I
mhm.
have a roster of tools to help me navigate those. So I might not be on a surfboard anymore. I could be in like a yacht, and I'm still feeling the pitches of the ocean, but
Mhm.
I have more tools and more awareness. And I think all this entire journey around mental health for me has been about creating greater awareness and sharing the tools with others, because of the depth of impact they had on me.
Is that why it's so important for you to share it?
Yes, yeah. I mean, my impact in what I want for the world is to have access to these types of things, to some accessible tools that really help in difficult times. It's not going to take the pain and the suffering away, but it can certainly alleviate it.
And I think that's a really important thing to emphasize because we talk about recovery as if it's an endpoint and you're recovered and then you're done. Like the depression's gone, bipolar disorder's gone, whatever it is that people are like, it's just gone. It's like, that's not how it is. It's like, it's there, but how do we manage it? What
Mm.
tools do we have in our toolbox? So you talk about self-awareness. And, I've been in spaces where I've supported others and like trying to walk this journey of mental wellness. And I always think that starting with self-awareness is huge. How do you support people in being more self-aware? And how do you know that you're in a place of self-awareness that can support your goals?
People have to want to be helped. If people don't want to be helped, then they're on their own journey until they realize.
Mhm,
I think they talk about that um in addiction, like until someone chooses to change their patterns of behavior, we can't change that for them.
mhm,
And for me, it was until I chose to heal and look at all the feelings I was feeling,
mhm,
I couldn't change. And the same goes to this too, is until I was ready to share my story with the world to have an impact that's positively rippling on the mental health that we're experiencing, no amount of like someone telling me to do it was going to help me. It's like an intuitive space. So that was a bit of a tangent. So what was the question?
I don't quite remember myself. um, but I think
Self-awareness.
it's about self-awareness
Yeah.
really, and like how do we get to a place of self-awareness that's useful, and how do we know that we are in that place?
Mm. Emotional intelligence, I think, plays a huge role. There's a lot of emotional intelligence work out there, but it's all what I really feel this all boils down to is being curious. The human brain is like Velcro for the negative and Teflon for the positive. And so the negative manifests in judgment
Mhm,
and self-ridicule or self-harm or like poor self-worth. So that spiral of negative thinking, which is what I still have to navigate today, is like, well, what voice am I going to listen to today? Like the champion voice or this voice that's telling me I'm not enough?
mhm,
It's listening to those types of conversations and creating awareness to that part of our brains and how our minds work, because the truth is we all have thoughts that are passing. And um I went to a Buddhist temple when I was navigating
mhm,
a divorce because I wanted to seek peace. I was like, what am I going to do? So they said something that has stuck with me. Your thoughts are like clouds. They roll in and they roll out. Some days there's no clouds. So there's few thoughts, but some days those thoughts are really dark and heavy, like a thunderstorm or a rain shower. And sometimes those clouds are heavy and last a week, but they always pass. And so I think we can really get into a slippery slope in our minds as humans, and this has been my experience,
mhm,
is having this inner judge, and it's
mhm,
of self, because if we're harsh and critical of ourselves, then we will probably be harsh and critical of another person. So having going back to this compassion piece, compassion is a choice. So, in some of the training that I do, there's a scale of, um, I can't remember what it's called, but it's a scale and it goes from
mhm,
pity, sympathy, empathy, compassion. And compassion is where I can be with another, or I can be with myself and my suffering without feeling like I need to escape it or do something to change it.
mhm.
Having more self compassion in this mental health journey is a huge puzzle piece. And then having compassion for others is the work that we're putting out into the world, because we all are navigating these types of conversations. We are all battling different types of inner dialogue. Um, there was a statistic like 64% of Americans have experienced some type of adverse childhood experience. So
Mm.
that's over the edge of 50% of
Wow.
people. And so there are people who haven't. And I follow a lot of the work from Gabor Mate, and so
Mhm.
many of us have experienced this, and it
Mhm.
all manifests from the womb. In
Mhm.
my school, they talked about the womb to the tomb. You know,
Mhm. Yeah.
we're all dealing with mental health from the womb to the tomb. Like
Mhm.
that's it. It's part of life, and so uh, it's having more self compassion and less judgment or criticism, because big T trauma, little t trauma, everybody has something, whether it's a childhood bully or
Mhm.
abuse, different types of abuse or addictions or their own demons that they're working through. We all have something that we're navigating. And so, like, why not do it all together with compassion?
I love that. I just why not do it together with compassion? So you just said trauma.
Mm.
People throw that word around a lot. What does trauma mean for you as someone who is, you're a practitioner in the game, so to speak? So, in your viewpoint, yeah, what is trauma?
I actually try not to use the word as
Okay.
much. And I appreciate that it is used often.
Mhm.
For my own interpretation from my own experience in life, the way I see it is an adverse experience in life.
Okay.
Some are way, way greater than I've experienced, and some are much less. We
Mhm.
all have these types of experiences in our life that our brains can adapt in different ways or create stories or narratives around in different ways. And one person's experience doesn't negate another's. We are all going through this together.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, I brought that information around the Gabor Mate work because he talks about it a lot, but I don't know that we escape it in life. It's part of
Mhm.
the human experience. And yes, some are experiencing it in way greater magnitude than others, but someone also might, because of the way that our bodies are programmed from womb on, the impact of a traumatic event on someone might have a much more significant impact if they've had a tougher childhood or the way that they've been brought up than it might have for another person. And so that's the resiliency piece, I think,
Mhm.
that makes everyone unique. And so we're all unique um, in our experiences of different things and how we process it. And the model, like the medical model of like the biopsychosocial. So your biology, your psychology, and your socio environment all impact our mental health and
Mhm.
impact who we are. And that really resonates for me. It feels very true. So it's not this one thing, it's multiple things. And it's how I've learned to be resilient over time is through kind of just paying attention to those different planes of, oh wow, that's interesting, this has impacted me or that has impacted me,
Mhm.
and doing it with curiosity, because I think we can take going back to trauma, we can take it and be really like heavy
Mhm.
and it can be feel really heavy and hard.
Mhm.
And what if we look at it with curiosity and compassion?
What does that look like?
um what that looks like for me, and or how that.
Or for you, or generally, just how do we look at, let's call them adverse experiences
Mm.
with curiosity and compassion?
Some of the work that I have done and often bring up with some of the work I do is getting a picture, like I've gotten a picture of myself as a child.
Mhm.
And like, oh, like that's an experience that you had, or a friend took me through a journey of like myself at every 7 year interval, because we change and shed and evolve every 7 years. And it was like, who were you? Who were
Hmm.
you at this 7-year-old picture? Who were you at this 14-year-old picture? Who were you at this next picture? And so it's like really just like appreciating ourselves, because from my perspective, there was this from my experience, there was this dance of like, I don't want to sit in my life and be a victim of circumstance. I want to
Hmm.
take what I have experienced and my interpretation of it and create purposeful change. And so I don't know, maybe that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does, but it leaves me with a couple other questions. Is,
Yeah.
what if you don't feel like you deserve that compassion? Or what if you don't feel like, you're so deep in the impact of all the things that have happened to you, you don't feel like you have that control to make changes?
Meet them where they're at. Be with them where they are. Like we referred to earlier, someone can't push you to where they want you to go. Someone can't dance around and celebrate and make you happier if you're in a really dark spot. So trying to do that is probably even more triggering for someone to be like, "Oh, just cheer up." No, like
Mhm.
that's not how it works.
No.
So meeting people where they're at. Oh gosh, there's what's the movie? What's the children's movie about emotion?
Inside Out.
Inside Out. So
Yeah, love it.
I do training with Graydon. It's an organization supporting these types of skills for education. Um, and we share a clip of Inside Out, where sadness and Bing Bong are like sitting together. And so, um, the happy one tries to cheer up Bing Bong and it doesn't work. And then sadness comes and just sits with Bing Bong in his sadness. And they're just sitting there together, like literally side by side in equality. Like there's no power dynamic, there's no get up and move. It's like, oh, wow, that must be really hard.
Mhm.
So that empathy piece is like meet people where they are and have empathy with them for where they are, because they will find a way, and it might require resources and tools. It might not be on their own, but they will find a way.
And I believe that so strongly, that we sort of just have to be with people and give them space to feel what they're feeling. Uh, because many times people have never had that. People will go, 30, 40, 50 years and never truly have that space. And it can be extremely liberating for them and can be the very start of a journey for them to be with them in that way. So thank you for sharing that. Coming back to you, early in the conversation, you talk about maladaptive behaviors and hiding and silencing your voice throughout your life. Um, how did you find your voice? And what does it mean to find your voice?
That's a good question. So the pain became so great that I couldn't stay silent anymore. So there was like an inner suffering that I knew I needed to do something. I knew something needed to change, and I wasn't really sure totally what it was. But finding my voice started with
Can I
emo
interrupt real quick? Sorry. Um, how did you know, like, when the pain was too great?
I was in depression. Deep. I was in like a depression, a sadness. I didn't feel like, so for me, I have an interpretation of depression as unresolved grief.
Mm,
And I think I was grieving. I was grieving a version of myself that I wasn't happy with. I was grieving life situations. I had unresolved grief. So I think there was a lot of grief involved. And when I was getting ready for this conversation, that's what really came up to me is I knew that I couldn't tolerate it any longer because there was so much pain and suffering inside. And I needed to change something. And that grief felt heavy.
mm,
And it did manifest in a ton of tears. I mean, I haven't had many tears lately, like in the way that I
mm.
used to. I'm still emotional, but it's different.
mm,
There was a grieving, and my inner mental track was really at its lowest point and the most debilitating at my lowest point in life. And it was like I knew intuitively and energetically that I had everything inside of me to get to where I wanted to go and the potential I knew I could be, and I know that I'm here for. So just that dissonance, and a lot of people these
mm,
days are using the word um purpose, but there was a really big disconnect for me as a mom trying to navigate career and child rearing.
mm,
So the dissonance was so strong in my career path. Like I didn't feel like I was in my purpose. I didn't feel like I was on the right path. I knew I was being a great mom,
mhm,
and that was my focus and priority, but there was a part of my soul that was really longing for more. And I felt a lot of guilt around that, to be honest. And I've chatted
mhm,
with my kids about it, like, or my eldest anyways, because
mhm,
having purpose, and part of my personality really thrives in learning and growing,
mhm, mhm,
and I felt stagnant. So
mhm,
that's what it felt like. And so I knew there was more in life for me, and I didn't know how to get there. I was afraid because of the
mhm,
guilt of wanting to be home and be with the kids, but then also not being there for them. Like that was so hard when we actually can bring it back to the women's mental health piece.
yeah.
That part was the career and the mothering, and like trying to figure that out for myself was so challenging. And so once I got on the path with coaching and then training and becoming, I just followed my next curiosity. So it was like I did the coaching, became a registered health coach, I did my master's, because this is what I knew all along inside of me that I was here for, but I
Mhm,
didn't know how to get there with young kids. And reflecting back, I mean, everything happens in the right time, right? Like everything in
mhm,
the universe, you're in the perfect place right now.
yeah.
So I was trying to get out of this place that I was trying to move forward, but I didn't know how. So I felt so stuck. So back to your question, like that's how I knew. That's how
Mhm.
I knew that I needed to do something different.
How did you finally arrive at that decision, and what was it like to take that leap?
I went through a divorce. So that was a catalyst for a deep healing journey. um, to look into myself. So that was one thing that sent me on this path. Another thing was the friends that I talked about were doing some of this work, and I was like, wow, that feels like right for me. So, um, encouragement from that community piece
Mhm,
on healing. I've always been interested in human behavior and psychology, and so I continued just to follow that. But the action piece was I was then on my own.
okay.
I was on my own with the three kids, and
Mhm,
it was a catalyst for change. It was a catalyst for a deep dive into some of the grief that I was carrying.
mhm, mhm. And you talk about grieving the old version of you. What
Yeah.
parts of that person did you have to grieve, if you don't mind sharing?
I actually think it might be I was grieving who I'd become.
Okay.
There was more of like a grief of who am I? What am I doing? And I think, you know, I make an assumption that most humans go through this inquiry like, who am I? What am I doing? Why am I here? What's going on? What's this all for?
Uh-huh.
So I was kind of in that. um, so I was kind of in that. And I was grieving who I had become. The silence piece
Mhm,
wasn't, it was not healthy for me. Actually, I'm very spiritual. And so, um, I follow a lot of the principles of like whatever we're experiencing in our energies and our life experiences manifest in different ways in our body. And so then I started to have thyroid nodules, and that's all
mhm.
associated with voice and our
Wow.
projection into the world. And so I was getting biopsies, and it was with my third baby. And so there was this, my body was telling me something was off, and I knew it was off. But my body then spoke. And there's some really great work about Your Body Keeps Score by
Yeah.
Basil Vanderklark. Yeah. So
Mhm,
I dove into a lot of reading on that. Um,
what does that mean when it's when your body keeps a score?
How it manifested for me was I was anxious. So
Okay.
my nervous system kept score of different situations that put me into fear or
Mm,
scarcity. So that's how my body was keeping score there, was manifesting in anxieties. Um, my body was keeping score in depressions because I was like not able to do things I wanted to do, or I wasn't where I wanted to be. My body was keeping score on my thyroid
mm,
because it was like, okay, wait a second, you've got something to look at here, and it's your voice. So whatever that looks like, in back into the feminine energy
mhm,
piece and women's mental health, um, in your women's power center, or like the lower power centers of the female body. Like
mm,
I was I had a small ovarian cyst, so my body was keeping score there with like the energy of power and standing up for yourselves. So those lower energetic points in the body. So
mm.
the body keeps score for me means that your body is telling you something when there's something off or equilibrium. And I know a lot of women today are suffering from um, endocrine
Mhm,
disorders, and a lot of that is with the thyroid. So it makes
mhm.
me wonder where women are suppressing themselves, where they're not voicing their opinions, where they're not stepping into their power, and how that's manifesting in these endocrine disorders.
Bringing it back to the piece of how this might manifest as a woman.
Mhm.
Um, could you talk about finding your voice and maybe sort of what those challenges might be through the lens of being a woman, and maybe you know what women can do to support that finding of their own voice.
For me, this has been my journey. Finding my voice means um, trusting my intuitions and following them. It means standing up for what I know to be true and right, and not fearing the backlash that might come, or the fear of being liked. I think that's a big one. Or being, I hear a lot of people talking about good girl. I don't associate with
Mhm,
that, but it's like the fear of being liked. It means speaking our boundaries, those yeses and nos that we talked about. And it means doing that in a way that is one small step out of your comfort zone first. I mean, I didn't arrive here to talk to you overnight. This journey has been a life journey, and like the deep dive has been a 10-year journey. So it's taken that long to find my voice. It means living in alignment with your values and saying yes and no in accordance. I've been very, very firm with that. My kids are my priority, and I will only make decisions based on like what their needs are and my needs are,
mhm,
in order to support them best. And it means self-worth. It means knowing my self-worth and like really believing that. And that has been some deeper work that I've had to do. And for women navigating this, it's baby steps. And a lot of the conversations that I have, people want to be from A to B in like overnight.
mhm,
And you mentioned that actually earlier. This is a journey. So finding my voice was like one small step at a time in the first easiest place I could use it. So wherever I felt safest to use my voice, I did.
mhm,
And even like talking with my parents, it's like over time we have conversations about like getting curious with their generations. And I've gone through some work, with my dad's side and my mom's side about like what was it like, what were their lives like, what were my grandparents, my great grandparents. And I can look at the traumas, and I've also shifted it to look at the generational gifts, because there are so many, we all have them, and it's what we shine the spotlight on that matters. And so we have to heal, and so not to repeat patterns and project or continue to suffer. But we also, at that same time, have to look at the gifts and shine the spotlight on who we are and our strengths and our resiliency, and all the generations before us that have helped us get to where we are. Is kind of how I've approached it, from that, like, what can women do, and like, here's what I've done.
how can we be better at doing that last piece, putting that emphasis on who we are and our resourcefulness and all those virtues that we bring into the world, our strengths. How can we be, women in particular, be better at that piece?
Community. Yeah, create community where you're surrounded by other women, allies, whoever, and I think a big portion of this is um, men and other genders, like surround yourself with community who really sees you and let them see you and let them share that with you and let them tell you who they see you to be. And then, over time, it's like finding the belief, because I've also worked with people who can't see any of it, can't see their strengths, can't see their greatness, can't see the gifts, can't see any of it because they're so deeply connected to the negative inner dialogue that it's a process. And back to the same thing, you can't move someone where they're not, but you can plant seeds for them of growth, plant seeds of them for development. And with my clients, I say I am like the one holding your north star for you, because I see you, I see what you're capable of. You might not see it right now, but I see it, and so I will hold this so strongly for you so that you can continue to crawl and then take steps and then walk or run or jog, however you're going to get there. But it's a momentum thing. And it's I think that the most important part is this is not an overnight journey. And we've said this, it's not a journey that ends, it continues.
The mental health world is evolving.
Mhm.
We're having more conversations in different communities. What conversations or what pieces need to be spoken more about with respect to women's mental health, in your opinion?
So there's some pretty staggering statistics that 3% of all studies conducted are on women's health. 3% only.
Are you serious?
Yeah, and that's on the CAMH website.
Wow.
So that's why
So what
I'm
you're saying is, sorry, like it's
I know.
flabbergasting. Like
I know. I couldn't believe it myself. 3%. Yeah, we've got a lot of work to do. And it doesn't mitigate. This is the most important. Like, I am here advocating for women's mental health. This does not mitigate men's mental health or other genders who
mhm.
are experiencing mental health. We have to do this work together in tandem, because the only way society and humanity evolves is when we all evolve together. So that
I
is,
agree, but it seems like we're missing a huge part of the puzzle here.
yeah, we are. We are. Yeah, that's why I'm advocating for it. I mean, we're missing a huge part of the puzzle, but um so places that I would like to point the mental health conversation for women is I heard recently the GTA, and I also heard in Burlington, they've declared a domestic violence epidemic, pandemic. We have a crisis on our hands. And 95% of women don't report some of the more forms of silent abuse. And I want to point the mental health conversation to that place for us to look at, because we talk about more overt abusive styles like physical abuse or sexual abuse, but the mental, emotional, psychological abuse is tricky. And if women aren't reporting it, it's impacting their mental health in a really significant way, in terms of their nervous system, their resiliency, their ability to be an amazing parent, mother, caregiver, contributor to society, employee. So that's one part of the puzzle. Mother's mental health is critical. There is work happening, and I'm hearing a lot more about it, about perinatal and postnatal and postpartum depression, which are all things that I really struggled and had to navigate as a mom, because I didn't have the resources or the tools or the knowledge. I had postpartum very strongly, and real that, like, back to that PMDD, the emotions and everything just like amplified through pregnancy and post pregnancy. And so just not having any of this was, if I had all of this, it would have been amazing, but I didn't. And so I want to help others who have this. So a mother's mental health is important, because in the work of Gabor Mate, from the womb to the tomb, if a mother is stressed and not well and not doing well, and you're in the womb and then out of the womb and experiencing the mother's stress, that impacts a child's growth and development. So we keep repeating this mental health cycle because the kids are coming out anxious or having their own challenges. So there's a important part right there for me.
They're inheriting
Yeah.
Wow.
That's the genetics piece, I guess, when people are talking about generational transfer, like, how can we, I mean, we're never going to stop it, but how can we mitigate it? How can we support it? How can we raise awareness to it and help that part of the conversation?
Through that lens, how can the community around mothers who might be experiencing prenatal, postnatal depression or other challenges hormonally, I guess, um, how can we be of better support?
This conversation is number one, starting more conversations. There are more organizations that are starting to support this type of work. I'm sure more will pop up over time, but our medical system needs to change. Women are birthing in a hospital with no knowledge, and there needs to be a structure or a system in place that, maybe it goes into OBGYN training, or there's midwives and all kinds of other modalities that I think have more range. I don't know, because it's been a long time. It's been 13 years since I've had a baby, but I don't know what the supports are out there. But I think awareness and conversation, and it has to include everybody in the family. So all the parents who are birthing this child into the world, there needs to be more conversation about the mental health of them. And like, we're not going to get it perfect. We're never going to, but just awareness. How do we have more awareness? Okay, so what do I do that helps me mitigate my stress, helps me mitigate my anxiety, makes life easier for the mother who is raising this being in their body and then putting it out in the world? And, you know, is it more community based? Is it a more community based way, like where there's so many interactions with different people, or is it just the parents? Like, what does that look like? So I just think, I mean, I don't know what it looks like, but I think this conversation is a start.
Absolutely. And I think with more understanding and more awareness and more um, compassion especially, then we can arrive at a better place. And, I think a thing that we haven't touched upon that's been in my mind a lot during this conversation is the role of sexism,
Mm,
and how sexism, like, for instance, with the statistic around, only 3% of the studies are focused on women. It's hard to arrive there without reasonably assuming that there's some sexism involved, right? So how can we be better at recognizing and confronting those things, so that when we're having these conversations, we can make sure that we're having them on a deep enough level to really move things forward and evolve, as you said.
so we are in a shift. As humanity, we are currently in a shift around this. There is so much gender bias and old structures that women are trying to fit themselves into. And I speak about it from workplace context. Why are we trying to put women in a construct that doesn't suit them or their style? What if we like started to change? And I think that's changing. But I also think the younger generations are, because we're becoming more conscious as a species, the younger generations are growing up with more awareness around emotional intelligence and their emotions and how to be. It's the older generations where we're still like in this change and shift, that and patterns can be passed down. So men have to do the work. Men have to look at themselves. And because I think a lot of the narrative for a boy growing up is, be tough, don't have emotions, suck it up. Like that type of dialogue is traumatizing, because naturally we're all born with emotions and feelings. And suppressing them, as we've talked about throughout this entire conversation, creates dis-ease, disease in the body, disease in the mind, disease in the relationship, because people aren't communicating or interacting. And I think once we get to this place where there's more vulnerability and more acceptance into looking into ourselves, and this facade of toughness, that has been projected, once that starts to crumble, I think we're getting there. Because even my youngest daughter is getting more than my older two kids since COVID hit, with a lot of social emotional learning in school. And this is a classroom setting, so all the kids are getting this information. All the kids are learning about their impact and it, like they even are using words I use in the corporate world, like intent and impact. And then I asked my daughter, what's it like for in this class? How do you like it? And she's like, it feels like you're talking to me. And so I'm like, okay, good. That means there's good things happening in the school
Yeah,
system.
yeah, yeah.
So that's what's happening. I think we're evolving. We're there. We're on the precipice, and it's time for vulnerability and for all of us to do the work together because we'll thrive better together.
Yeah, I just really love everything that you said. So thank you for that. Is there anything else that you want to add to the conversation that maybe we haven't spoken about yet?
When you asked about where we have work to do with women's mental health, I mean, we talked about hormones from my own journey. The only other thing that I don't think I have shared, so I shared a lot about how I've healed mentally and emotionally and
Mhm.
socially. And socially is my relationship with myself. But what I hadn't shared yet is the physical healing of my brain from a traumatic brain injury 3 years ago. And as I was going through healing the physical brain from my experience and the mental health that concussion has on women, um, and it goes back to where we are with the domestic violence, women, the most predominant area women get concussions from is from domestic abuse. It's greater than any level of concussion from a professional sport, and we're
Wow,
not talking enough about that.
that is
So
wow.
that PCS, like you're an athlete. I got my concussion training for a triathlon, and there's a lot of conversation about um, the impact of concussion on the brain for athletes, whether it's NCAA or professional sports and
Mhm.
the NFL, the NHL, all those places. And it has a significant impact, and we need to talk about it more for women because I think the statistics suggest that women are more sensitive to concussion, just to the
Yeah.
genetic of the brain. And so I wanted to add that piece because post concussion syndrome is really real. It impacts mental health, it impacts emotions, it impacts people's capacity and contribution in the world. And I'd like to see more attention on it. Yeah, I mean, like, I just don't think there's enough conversation around it. I mean, I know other mothers in my neighborhood who have had concussion from like a mountain biking accident or slipping on the ice, even like
Mhm.
little life things. These are not
Yeah.
like, doesn't have to be abuse, it's life,
Mhm.
that haven't been able to go back to work, haven't been able to drive their car, they're on permanent disability, but like we can talk about this and help people navigate to stay in life versus like dropping back or dropping out of life, kind of how depression does to people, they isolate. Concussion can do the same thing, and so I want there to be a conversation around this.
So I really appreciate you sharing, not just that, but so much in our conversation. But what about you? Like, where are you today? How are you doing? You know, how like how is Jocelyn feeling in her life these days?
I mean, I feel I am filled with so much joy, and like we had talked about throughout this conversation, it doesn't, just because I have joy doesn't mitigate the fact that I'm still navigating my own anxiety or my own inner dialogue. I just have more tools now on how to be more resilient. And I didn't have those before. So those waves of surfing, I was getting sucked under way more often. Now I have a toolkit that I want to share with more people so they're not getting sucked under the waves and they can surf more. And so my whole life has been filled with great experiences, like so much gratitude and appreciation, and this whole like undercurrent of what's going on inside of me and what forces have created this to get me to where I am today. And who am I right now? I am like incredibly committed and on purpose to support greater mental well-being for all and create awareness for everybody. And so I think the thing that we're missing in the conversation right now for mental health is this is not a conversation just for people suffering. This is a conversation for humanity and people who feel healthy in their mental health, because those are the people that can step in, step up, and support people who are having a hard time. And it's not a choice. I know there's such a fallacy out there, a stigma. It's not a choice, as we've talked about from birth on. Program our bodies are getting coded, and sure, there's neuroplasticity, and we can change, and that's what's helped me through this. And Some people just have different resources than others because that is what their life has been. But we can give them more resources to help them navigate the storms when they come.
So I guess the last question for you is, Jocelyn, what makes you unsinkable?
Oh gosh. Okay. So what makes me unsinkable is that when I get sucked under, I am resilient. I have tools. I share them with my kids. I am deeply committed. And when the next storm hits, I will ride it and I might get sucked under because it's not going to happen, but I'm much more aware. And I want to express so much thanks to my parents for being with me in this journey because part of what makes me unsinkable is their support and their willingness to have conversations, and they're looking at their own oh wow, interesting, how was I raised, what impact did this have, it's created a conversation. And so with them I would not be here, and without my kids, what makes me unsinkable too is my children. We have a very open dialogue where I share to the level that they need to hear about my own challenges to normalize it. And also, we have an open dialogue so that they can teach me how they want to be treated because I want them to be unsinkable.
I love it. I love it. Uh, wow, so many gems, so many gems, so much wisdom. Thank you so much, Jocelyn, for this conversation. I don't know if you want to plug anything, your company, what you're doing, where people can find more of you, anything like that.
Sure, yeah. So I am the founder of True. We do work in corporations as a fractional head of well-being. We go in a partnership to really tackle well-being across an organization. And as a mental health researcher and mental health and well-being coach, we work with executives and teams to navigate so many of these conversations that we have because mental health in the workplace can look different. Like it can be those perspectives we talked about, it can be boundaries, all those things that I talked about around finding my voice. Those are skills that leaders need, that employees need. And so that's the work we do. And it's trueliving.ca. And that's the work we do in the world, is really helping organizations create healthy and well cultures.
I love it. Curiosity, compassion, empathy, evolution, all these pieces. Thank you for sharing today, Jocelyn. It's been an amazing conversation. I just want to say thank you. Appreciate it.
Asante, I appreciate you. Thank you for curating this conversation and being witness to my story the first time I tell it in this way. I appreciate the container that you held, and Unsinkable for the work you're doing in the world.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. All right. Well, that's a wrap. I'm going to keep the recording going.